And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our platform where we are rapidly advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism across the state of Louisiana, resisting manufactured pandemics, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp and returning our legislature and our government to the citizens of Louisiana. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for a couple minutes out of your day. I hope that you are on your way to having a great day. If you're not having a great day already, I hope that we will encourage you and brighten your spirit. We are interrupting our endorsement series to talk about noncompliance. So I'm looking forward to that, and we will get into it shortly. But first, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Psalm chapter 93, verse 1. And it says, "Look, Yahweh now reigns as king. He has covered himself with majesty and strength, wearing them as his splendor garments. Regal power surrounds him as he sits securely on his throne. He's in charge of it all, the entire world, and he knows what he's doing." And I just love that so much. It's such a great reminder of who the reigning king is. And even though it seems like chaos surrounds us and evil is everywhere, God is on his throne. He's still the all-powerful one, the almighty God. He's not stressed out. He's not wringing his hands over what he sees because he has always seen it. And I believe the reason we're seeing so much more wickedness than we ever have is because God's exposing it so that we can be part of the solution. So let me charge you today to ask the Lord what your role is in being part of the solution to clean up the evil that you see in your town, in our state, and beyond that.
And we will have some very specific solutions in light of what we're going to be talking about today, and some specific calls to action in light of some of the things that we've heard recently about a perhaps new COVID or Omicron variant that is supposedly on the rise in the country, which may lead to another effort to lock us down. What do we know about that, Danielle?
Chris, can you even believe that we're here having this conversation again? It's just nauseating, really, and it just feels tired.
It feels unbelievable to me. It is tiring. I don't think it's coincidental that there are 3 states where there are major elections coming up, not the least of which is the governor of Louisiana, who has taken on the federal government and won with regard to the suppression of our speech across multiple federal agencies. Why is this coming about right now? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing, Danielle. There are citizens across this state, many listeners, who simply are not going to comply with it. And you know another state that is not going to be complying with this. I read a great quote from Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, earlier, and 3 or 4 days ago. He said, "This state," I don't know about other states, but the state of Mississippi will not be succumbing to fear. We will not be enforcing any broad-scale health protocols in Mississippi, vaccine mandates, or any other health protocols, mask mandates. We will not succumb to fear. We did it once before, and we are not doing it again. And I was very gratified. So apparently the governor of Mississippi is reading some reports about what may be coming as well, and he is prepared to be non-compliant.
You know, I'm so jealous of that kind of leadership, honestly. But we have an opportunity here in a couple months to get that kind of leader, which I'm very much looking forward to. But we are hearing, Chris, that in Louisiana and Mississippi both, supposedly, reportedly, are amongst the highest rates of COVID hospitalization in the country. Now, is that true or is it not true? I mean, it just depends on if you trust the mainstream media and all of those reporting outlets that were reporting on COVID during the quote unquote pandemic. So I don't believe it, but I do think that the state of Mississippi is going in the right direction and their governor is doing the right thing. Chris, we haven't heard anything from our governor, have we?
No, we haven't heard anything from our governor. We do need to make it very clear to our listeners, Danielle, that our governor, Governor Edwards, has not imposed any kind of emergency health protocols on our state, and hopefully he will not. Hopefully, even he perhaps has learned from the debacle of 2020 and 2021 when our entire state was locked down, when we had some very great state representatives who were trying to revoke his emergency decree as Louisiana citizens across the state suffered and lost their businesses and increased incidences of suicide and family isolation, our children suffering because they couldn't attend school. The suffering that Louisiana citizens suffered during that time period is probably without historical precedent. And it's interesting, Danielle, in 2020, we had, as we still have now, a supermajority Republican legislature. Sadly, too many of our rhino Republicans in 2020 refused to lift a finger to assist great representatives like Alan Seabaugh and others, Raymond Cruz, Blake Miguez, Dodie Horton, and a number of other conservatives to move a petition forward that would have revoked our governor's emergency decrees, particularly when everybody knew that COVID posed no threat to 99.9% of the Louisiana population, but he kept us locked down. And I would like to take a minute to remind, just so we don't repeat it again now, I want to remind our listeners of just a few of the rhino Republicans in 2020 who had a chance to give us some real relief, who had a chance to sign on to that petition in the legislature and revoke that emergency lockdown and refuse to do it. I'm talking about the Chris Turners and the Bill Wheats and the Barbara Freibergs and the Joe Stagneys and the Buddy Mencies and a number of others, the Paula Davises and many others whose names I'm not recalling right now, probably very fortunately for them. However, it is important to remind our listeners right now, not that they probably need any reminder because they're the ones who suffered from it, but we are not going to have a repeat of that again in the state of Louisiana. No more manufactured emergencies when none exist. We can isolate anybody who may be vulnerable, those with comorbidities and the elderly, and quarantine them. But we are going to oppose even a hint of locking down citizens across the state and shutting down their businesses, separating their families, masking people back up, keeping people back home, coercing and cajoling people once again to take a vaccine, Danielle. We cannot afford it again in this state.
No. And Chris, for people who are nervous about COVID, for people who are worried, for people who really enjoyed lockdowns, I mean, you have the right to do whatever it is you want to do. Just don't impose it on anybody else. I mean, you were talking about people with comorbidities and people who are particularly vulnerable. It's everybody's personal responsibility to take care of themselves. And for people who have children who can't take care of themselves, it's your right to make the decisions that you want to make for your children and to allow every other parent to do the same. And the same for the vulnerable elderly who may be indisposed and unable to make decisions for themselves. Of course, caretakers, guardians, children of those elderly adults should make the decisions that they feel best for their family. But I don't think that it is not the place of the government to tell any of us how to take care of our own health and our own families. And that's really what the heart of this is. And I think, Chris, you and I share a big passion for this. And I think the way that COVID was handled and mishandled in the state serves as a stark reminder. And we're not going to let that happen again, as you said. LeCag and the State of Freedom are using people's stances on COVID, on lockdowns, as a litmus test for whether we're going to support candidates. So this past weekend at the Louisiana GOP convention in Lafayette, we started to reach out to candidates to sign a pledge that says that they will stand against any mandates from the state, federal government or the international community. And we have had a great response, even though, look, we have not reached out to all of the candidates yet. So if your favorite candidate is not on this list, it doesn't mean that they're not willing to sign it. This is just a sample of those who have signed it so far. But Liz Murrill, who we've had on the show, who's running for Attorney General, she was very quick to sign it. She's a very, very good attorney. Stephen Schreiber signed it. He is running for state senate in District 21. Brandon Trosclair, who's running for Secretary of State, who we've also had on. Randy Bush, who's running for state senate in District 37. Mike Segur, who's running for state rep in District 92. Chris, against Joe Stagney?
Yes, indeed, against atrocious Joe Stagney. And we were very, very happy to get a signed pledge from hopefully future Representative Mike Segur. We were very, very thrilled about that.
And one more I wanted to mention on that list is John Raymond, who we just also had on, who's running for state rep in District 104.
Yes, many current and prospective state legislators have already signed our pledge, and many of them, frankly, have committed to it within the context of the response to our candidate inquiry that we've been sending out to many, many candidates who are running. So we have firm commitments from a number of current representatives, senators, and also challengers about resisting and refusing to comply with any manufactured emergency mandates on the part of our governor or on the part of our president. And I do not say that lightly, Danielle. And I want to make that very clear because I understand that there's certainly a possibility that this strain, that this Omicron variant could be a threat to people, as you said, with comorbidities and the elderly. And we have great sensitivity and great compassion for those people. But we are going to resist at every turn any effort to lock down our state again and to impose the type of misery and distress on Louisiana citizens that was done before. And that was done before because of the failure of too many Republican rhinos to stand up against it. And we just have to be very clear and very straight about that. And we have to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And, I think it bears mentioning, Chris, that of course families can't endure this again. Children don't need to endure this again. And certainly our economy can't afford to endure it again. So we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to stand up for our constitutional rights. And we have to let the government know that actually, no, you work for us. And I know that might be a tired refrain to some sitting members of Congress, to senators, to elected officials, but truthfully, the government does need to be responsive to the people, and it's not the place of the government to tell us how to live. So Chris and I have been having a discussion, and we want to do a quick call to action for the listeners. What can we do to preempt this insanity? Should it rear its ugly head again? Of course, right now it's rumors. It's a few mask mandates at colleges and universities. I think there may be the threat of some masking for flights sometime in the future. But first and foremost, I think our stance and our predecision is do not comply. Absolutely do not comply. And I think we also, Chris, need to start local, right? We need to talk to some local officials.
Absolutely. The first call to action is for every one of our listeners and your family and your friends to contact your local sheriff and make a very urgent request that our sheriff is the most powerful law enforcement official in the entire parish. He is beholden to nobody. He's not beholden to the governor. He's not beholden to the state legislature. He's beholden only to the Constitution. And his fundamental responsibility is to protect our constitutional rights against federal or state encroachment. That's what the job of the sheriff is to do, other than, of course, enforce the law, because they're law enforcement officers, and that's very important too. But they are great buffers and great barriers between the government and an abuse of our constitutional rights, which is exactly what another emergency lockdown would be, a violation of our constitutional rights. So my strong admonition is for our listeners and supporters and people across the state to contact their local sheriff and tell them, A, we are not going to comply with any mandates regarding this, and we are demanding and strongly urgently requesting that you fill the gap and make sure that you protect our constitutional rights in the event that something like that comes down the pike. So the sheriff is number one. Contact your local sheriff. It would also be a good idea perhaps to contact local council members, local school board members. I know that time is limited, primarily the sheriff, but also some council members, if you know them, school board members, and then also the Louisiana Department of Health. Wouldn't you agree, Danielle? Isn't that a place to contact?
Yes, and also maybe just a reminder to those officials that you were just mentioning, Chris, but this is an election year, so they need to know that you are watching how they respond in these ensuing weeks leading up to the October 14th election. How is your parish president going to stand, the candidate for parish president or mayor, how are they going to stand when it comes down to enforcing a mandate or not? So I think, it's important to remind them that that's going to be a big decision maker for you when you go to the ballot box. And then, Chris, like you said, LDH, the Louisiana Department of Health, the Secretary of the Department of Health is Stephen Russo. His phone number is 225-342-9500. And I think it's important that we just tell them that we will not comply, and they had better not try and force any mandates on the citizens of Louisiana because they don't have the authority to do it. I mean, it's like your toddler telling you that he wants you to do something. Like you could do it if you wanted, but you don't have to do it. So I don't understand why we feel so compelled to, behave according to the way that these administrative agencies tell us, because it's not their place to tell us to act that way. And Chris, what can the legislature do?
Before we get to the legislature, let me just fill in or just respond briefly regarding the LDH. Every recommendation that the LDH has made, going back to the very beginning of COVID in March of 2020, has been either completely false or wildly exaggerated. Their statistics, their recommendations, their protocols have caused tremendous harm and done very, very little good for the citizens of Louisiana. I have no confidence in the Louisiana Department of Health. I have no confidence in the recommendations that they make. In fact, I think if I were to listen to a recommended health protocol coming from the Louisiana Department of Health and just make it a habit to do just the opposite of what they recommend, I think I would be right 80, 90, 95% of the time. That's how little confidence I have in the LDH. And I would encourage, as you said, all of our listeners and supporters to contact LDH Stephen Russo, either by phone, find his email. I don't know what his email is, but in the subject line of every email that our group sends out, and hopefully it's hundreds and hundreds of hundreds, should be, "We will not comply."
I love that. We'll find that email address and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Yes, we will not comply, and then state specifically why. I'm not complying, and we are demanding that you do not cooperate with any government health emergency imposed upon us by the governor. And by the way, while you're at it, you might want to start giving us some real statistics and some information that we can actually trust. I'm not trying to be overly negative here, Danielle, but the one agency in the state of Louisiana in whom I have the least amount of confidence is LDH. I've seen them testify in committee at the legislature. I've seen the information that they've put out there. I've seen the way that they have cooked the books regarding all of the deaths supposedly attributable to COVID when, in fact, due to the help of people like Connie Sampignaro and others who did the research, those deaths were not caused by COVID. They were caused by other comorbidities, and the person happened to have had COVID, but it was not a causal relationship to their death. That's misleading. That's one of many things, and I could go on for a long time. But LDH, I don't trust. Contact them and say that we will not comply.
Great. And then, Chris, we had also thought it would be really helpful, obviously, as always, to email your state rep and your state senator. What would you want people to tell them?
Contact your state rep, your state senator, and first of all, tell them, we know that this is an election year. You're all up for reelection, and we're going to be paying very close attention to that when we go vote. Make it publicly clear, number two, that you will oppose and resist any effort on the part of our governor to impose any emergency health decree upon us or any quote unquote emergency health protocols, vaccines, masks, lockdowns, quarantines, that you will oppose it, you will not comply with it, and that you expect your state representative and your state senator, whoever it happens to be, to publicly pledge that they will resist any such effort and that they will sign something in writing that we can provide to them, be happy to do it, indicating that, confirming that in writing. That's what you need to tell your state rep. You will not comply, and you are urgently demanding that they do not comply either.
Yes. And obviously, please find out if your state rep or state senator is running unopposed, because it could be embarrassing if you tell them you're watching the election and they happen to be not really facing a challenger. So please check that out on the Secretary of State website. We will provide that link as well. And then lastly, at the federal level, contact your member of Congress and your senator. That you can do that at congress.gov. Again, just ask them to oppose any federal emergency declarations and ask them, I think if you really want to go the extra mile, you could ask them to rescind or block any and all funding for the CDC and NIH, because those two institutions have done more harm to this country in the last 3 years than any of the good they probably have ever done.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Tremendous harm. And it is very important, I think, to contact your congressman, your U.S. congressman, your U.S. senator. But also keep in mind that the federal government does not have the authority to issue emergency health declarations upon individual states. Under our Constitution, that's the job of the governors. And you recall in the 2020 pandemic, Danielle, that a number of states did issue emergency health decrees, and a number didn't. I think it was South Dakota. I don't think they did anything of the kind except act reasonably in response to a virus that really affects less than half of 1% of the population. And they responded reasonably and sensibly. And guess what? I believe they came out far better than most other states who did impose these draconian lockdowns, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right about that?
I think it'd be very interesting to look at their mental health statistics now versus some of us who did lock down and see what the difference is.
Yeah. So I think because of the separation of powers under the Constitution, if people only have limited time and can't contact or don't have time to contact everybody that we're talking about here, number one would be your sheriff. Contact your sheriff. And number two would be your own state rep and your own state senator. We will not comply with any emergency health mandates issuing from our governor, and we are expecting and urgently requesting that you make your public position known on this, that you will not comply, and that you will resist any such efforts. And also, Danielle, I think that we need to make a call if in fact it comes down, and again, we don't know if it will, and hopefully it won't, but if it does come down, for our Republican legislators, senators, and state representatives to call a special session and go in and immediately revoke that emergency health decree, which they have the statutory power to do. Call a special session, go in and revoke it. And That is something that we can do. And if it does come down, we can certainly make that urgent call to action at that time to reconvene the legislature and take care of it that way as well. But for now, we are in a preemptive mode. We certainly hope that none of this comes about, but based upon what we've seen before and the profound mistrust that so many have in our government, to be preemptive right now, I think is the only posture to have. What say you?
I agree. And I think that a show of force to some of these leaders who have made the wrong choices in the past for us on our behalf will give them an indication of the pain that they will suffer and the torment they will suffer at the hands of many, many, many more phone calls and emails should they not respond appropriately. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to let them know that they do not control our lives, and we will not let them do that again.
Yes, well, very well said. And Danielle, the reason why I am so passionate about this today and the reason why I feel so strongly about it is that I saw with my own eyes watching what happened in 2020 and 2021 under the guise of protecting our health and our safety. We have seen the steady erosion of our constitutional rights. We have seen our justice system, our law enforcement, our health system, and our media weaponized to silence political opponents, weaponized to silence people who dare stand up to federal abuse and federal encroachment. And we cannot let it happen again. The citizens of Louisiana will not survive another 2020, another 2021, and we can't let it happen. And we are going to do everything we can to protect them. And we're asking our listeners to take steps to protect themselves from it preemptively.
Yes. And, I guess if anyone is feeling fearful about people's reaction to your noncompliance, I just would say, would you rather be called a name or would you rather lose your freedoms? Because I think that's exactly the decision we're making, whether we do it consciously or not. We need to decide in advance that we're going to be bold, we're going to be strong, we're going to have very strong backbones. We're not going to cow in the face of people calling us names, and instead what we're going to do is what we have the constitutional right to do, which is live our lives, and live with the pursuit of freedom.
Absolutely. And if we stand up together, determined to live our lives in freedom, if we all stand up together, you know what, Danielle? We don't have anything to worry about. There are more of us than there are of them. And despite their efforts to try to divide us, we simply have to remember that there are more of us than there are all of them. And if we stand up together in unison and resist and simply refuse to comply, they don't have any choice because we're more powerful than they are, but they don't want us to know that. They're supposed to be serving us, not the other way around. So I am just thrilled to death to have a platform to encourage all of our listeners and all of our supporters to reach out to these folks that we're talking about and make these urgent demands. Because you know what, Danielle, as we learned in the legislative session, they listen to them, don't they?
Yeah, they sure do. And I think that they're in a very vulnerable time since it's an election year. So people are perking up. I think people have learned lessons too, Chris. I mean, you and I have been talking about that there are people who, saw COVID one way and since have maybe woken up or since have realized the error of their ways. So I can appreciate that. And, just don't do it again.
Just don't do it again. And whatever mistakes were made in the past, that is in the past. We need you on board. We need you moving forward with us to claw our freedom back. Our show, Danielle, you made such a great point earlier. Our show is about preserving freedom in the state of Louisiana. But within the context of today's show, we're going to be working to claw back the freedom that they took away from us during that COVID pandemic and try to set a precedent of normality going forward. But that's not what we're going to allow to happen. I'm just very thankful to have the opportunity to be with you this afternoon today, Danielle, and I'm looking forward to working and moving forward and every opportunity I have and you have and our listeners have to spread the word that we will not comply. And in doing that, we will claw back our freedom in the state of Louisiana.
We will. Have a great one, Chris. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.